Hi everyone, please support our videos on Patreon. The link's at the end of the video and in the down there part. Thank you, you're lovely. I'm going to be talking about gay rep today, and while I've certainly beaten that topic to death, I want to talk about something slightly related to it. I've discussed what makes good gay rep, or rather the kind of gay rep we need to be seeing more of, but one thing I don't talk about directly is why we don't see it as often as we should. I'm also going to be covering things I tangentially covered in my video on Katra and Nate Stevenson as well, so this will all seem familiar, but I need to get this out, if only for my own sake. So, why don't we get more meaningful gay rep? So gay rep in animation is a minefield topic. It's not that we don't have a lot of it, but there's a significant divide between shows that are championed and held up for having revolutionary gay rep and shows that actually have it. And when the stars align and a show is given all the press attention for gay rep and does have it, it always seems to come with a mountain of asterisks, and the rest of us ask, why? Why did all the gay characters in Steven Universe have to be hidden under the metaphorical guise of the gems? Why did Cacherdora have to be... that? Just why? So the obvious answer people give is executive meddling. That's the automatic response to a criticism of a show where the executive producer is the subject of many people's parasocial relationships. One problem I have with it is 90% of the time it is a thoughtless, automatic conclusion someone draws because it's convenient and means the person doesn't have to actually engage with the criticism itself. It's even contradictory at times. Audiences will praise a show for something one week and then blame it on executives the next week. And creators, well, let's just say they're not the most honest bunch in the world. The chief example of this remains Voltron Legendary Defender, where the creators engaged in many violently homophobic tropes and then blamed it on the executives, only for DreamWorks to pop up and go, "We explicitly told you not to do this," and revealed that the creators had not only refused to listen to LGBT staff members, but had been abusing them as well. The Dragon Prince had a similar controversy, creepily similar in fact, and it came out that DreamWorks has a relatively hands-off policy when it came to their contracted shows, rendering claims of many creators that executives were the reason for their actions to be false. It's such an easily believed story for two reasons. One, executive meddling is an accepted norm of the industry. Every show has an executive producer who oversees the production and makes final decisions on everything, or at least they're supposed to, and they have other executives for the studio distributing the show to answer to about content. This isn't always a bad thing. Executive meddling practically saved Voyager from becoming bleak, dreary, depressing misery porn, and it's the primary reason the first season of Star vs. the Forces of Evil was so good. Two, it's convenient. Audiences never ask for elaborations when this excuse is given. They take it at face value, never think twice about it because it washes their faves of all wrongdoing and lets them off the hook. And we're in a period of fandom where people are really touchy about the reality that creators are flawed, imperfect beings. Hell, Potterheads have been having an existential crisis for a clitting decade over Rowling being a far-right lunatic. People can't even like villains anymore without making up tragic backstories for them and demanding redemptions. Fuck it, I liked Kylo Ren when he was basically Space Vanitas. I guess he never stopped being Space Vanitas now that I think about it.
When you were little, you formed a special bond. We are brothers who together make a greater whole.
Look, I don't have a segue. I'm talking about the way we often compare shows to each other, especially in the wake of The Owl House. See, when Lumity became canon and the general public got a taste of a show being casually sapphic for once, it sparked a lot of discourse about the fact that, hey, you know, on reflection, a lot of the things we were championing weren't very good now that we have good stuff to compare. That's not an unfair conclusion to draw, a tad reductive, but not unfair. This drew counter-arguments of, it was the executive's fault, and these shows walked so Lumity could run, which is cyclical discourse. We do this every time, you know. This time it's Cacherdora walked so Lumity could run, even though those two relationships are nothing like each other. But last time it was Korosami walked so Cacherdora could run.
You don't win. You just do a little better each time.
This is part of why I find the discourse so exhausting and so pathetic, because the excuses get trotted out like clockwork by stans who don't want to accept that maybe their precious corporate product was something less than perfect. She-Ra is the current hot button one because it was the previous show and had the unfortunate circumstance of being written by someone who clearly needed his friends to sit him down and make him watch a movie that wasn't animated in Japan by the time it ended. Because fandom discourse is circular and never changes, comparisons between Cacherdora and Lumity were inevitable, and so were the excuses. So background for those who forgot or didn't follow it or just happened to be living under a rock or are Amish and just experiencing the internet for the first time. But She-Ra and the Princesses of Power had a 5-season long romantic subplot between Adora and Catra that was kinda like Joker, Harley, Raylo, and Starco all got put in a blender, in that it went fucking nowhere for years and in fact was actively working backwards with near constant scenes of Adora being physically and psychologically tortured by her supposed love interest. See, the problems with Catradora were twofold. They dragged this shit out until the very last episode, and Catra was awful. Like, just straight up awful. The official reasons for dragging things out, given by Nate Stevenson, was that he had to build it up so that the case could be made to DreamWorks that this was the only logical conclusion for these characters. Stevenson's biggest fear was being told firmly that he wouldn't be allowed to do this, and didn't even inform the executives he was doing this until the final season, where, allegedly, there was no other option or explanation other than romantic love, and it couldn't be cut out later. And I'm reminded of when I criticized Steven Universe for making the gay wedding share screen time with dummy-thick Joseph Mengele, and people were saying that was actually a good thing because it couldn't be censored because otherwise the story would be ruined. Yeah, you heard that right. In the minds of Steven Universe fans, homophobic executives and governments apparently care more about continuity than their own bigotry.
Wow! You're an idiot!
We all saw what the show was doing from episode 1, and if we saw it, DreamWorks definitely saw it and just said nothing. If your own unsubtle writing didn't give you away, the avalanche of articles telling everyone what you were doing definitely did. Anyway, the problem with this defense isn't just that you weren't as sneaky as you thought you were, it's also that it doesn't work. Like, logistically, the idea is that the longer the show went on, the more apparent it would become that Adora and Catra getting together was the only logical conclusion for them. In reality, however, the opposite was true. The longer the show went on, the more obvious it was that these two should never enter a relationship together. Catra shouldn't be in a relationship with anyone without 10 years of therapy and maybe a few good ass kickings first.
I love you! I always have! And you were there. This is what you left me for? You, on the other hand, you're not looking so good.
I'm sorry, but in what universe does this have a only logical conclusion of anything but a restraining order? We watch Adora get beaten up, humiliated, gaslit, talked down to, screamed at, nearly killed multiple times, mind-controlled, psychologically tortured, and we're expected to believe that these are the seeds of their inevitable romance?
After all you've put me through, woman, the last thing I'll give you is the peace of death.
What twisted fucking mind thought this was a good idea in any way, shape, or form? Well, this is where we come to the real root of the problem. See, Stevenson has said in interviews that faux romantic subtext, which is enemies that kinda wanna fuck each other as much as they wanna snap each other's necks, not necessarily in that order, is one of his favorite relationships to write. And a lot of his previous works, like Nimona and Runaways, involves this trope as well.
There it is!
Oh hey, look, the root of the problem is in the exact same place it always is. No wonder DreamWorks didn't notice if 4 entire seasons were devoted to the kind of thing you'd normally only find on the deep web, or at least in incognito mode. The key failing of blaming all this on executive meddling is that it implies that if you gave Stevenson an environment of zero restrictions and zero oversight, that he would have made something better. And we can see right in front of us that no, he wouldn't. In fact, this is arguably something he's happy with. This is closer to his creative vision than it isn't. He literally performed shoddy subterfuge to make this exact conclusion happen. This was the creative vision, unfiltered through the sheer indifference of his employers who were already greenlighting this shit anyway. The vision itself is flawed. You can't claim you compromised when you're writing the same story you have always fucking written, especially when you were still getting lavished in tongue bats. Because it's not like She-Ra was critically panned. It wasn't. It was celebrated and lauded and praised to high heaven pretty much the moment it came out. The show was called a slow burn LGBT romance of our dreams, and enemies to lovers pairings are so popular and with such vocal fan bases that a pack of white supremacists were able to convince Disney that abuse was more romantic than an affectionate interracial relationship somehow.
You always take shots from folks who just don't get the joke. And don't call me Puddin'.
Raya and the Last Dragon had people salivating over the violently hateful relationship between Raya and Namaari and calling it frenemies and sexual tension. Hell, people still, to this day, talk about the apparent sexual tension between Elastigirl and Screenslaver in a scene where Elastigirl is suffocating to death. This wasn't a criticism that necessarily needed to be responded to or addressed, and doing that only highlighted the flaws. This is what Stevenson believes is the only logical conclusion for these characters. It's not. Objectively, it's not. It might strike the favorite tropes of a lot of very sad people, but this sentence just flat out isn't true. And you're telling me you had to play mind games with DreamWorks, a company that so far has been content to just let the gays be in every Netflix cartoon they publish, even the shitty ones? Especially the shitty ones? Sorry, no, I don't buy that. I think the more likely answer is Adora and Catra got together in the finale because that's how most TV romance works regardless of orientation. Shows that have the main couple get together before the finale are actually quite rare. It's a big dramatic moment, and there have been shows in the past criticized for getting characters together too early, even though it's almost always better that way. And Catra mistreats Adora so severely because the creator is so trope poisoned that this is just what sexual tension looks like to him. A lot of people really are just slaves to tropes. They won't do things any other way. There's a small army of people that just lives for this shit. They love seeing women brutalize each other or be brutalized as the precursor to romance, and a vocal minority of that group will insist that not being into physical violence as a love language is purity culture and something only prudes do, and they're totally feminist as they frig themselves to Rakona Sheldon books.
That isn't the problem, Carl. Why would you think any of this was a good idea?
Probably because I'm a dangerous sociopath with a long history of violence.
Oh.
I don't understand how you keep forgetting that.
The uncomfortable truth is that the creative vision was deeply flawed. The things the author likes were problematic, bordering on fucked up, and where they weren't problematic, they were just bad. The tropes he likes aren't very good, and he clearly has issues where his talents and his vision don't actually line up. So we come back to why the Owl House did it so much better, despite working for a far more restrictive company. And the answer is simple. Dana Terrace is just a better writer. She's a better storyteller. She had a better creative vision. She doesn't actually care that much for romance, which is why the romance is so low-key and casual, because she doesn't have a favorite trope getting in the way and gumming up the works, and so you just go with what rationally makes sense for the characters involved without your favorite trope coloring your vision. And the truth is that a lot of people just like this kind of story more. Violence as a love language isn't something a lot of people actually like, it's just something they begrudgingly tolerate. The people who do are just loud and are always itching to pick fights with people over it. Just like any other pro-shipper, Catra Adora stans got exactly what they wanted, and they're still just so mad all the time and always lashing out at people. And now you have a show that is serving most people a romance that they wanted, but just never got. The truth isn't that people are only starting to reflect poorly on She-Ra in the wake of the new Shiny, but that those people always dislike this story element. She-Ra had a few years to simmer down, and it's not in the clickbait limelight anymore, and so now you see what had previously been drowned out by aggressively positive articles and violent harassment. Catra Adora was controversial precisely because it's written for people who like watching women get beaten up, and most women don't like watching that. And that's why parroting Catra Adora walked so Lumity could run is so fallacious, because these aren't people who are just moving the goalpost. They always hated this shit. They hated it when it was happening, and they don't think Catra Adora walked at all. It's just a matter of getting better gay rep. We're getting gay rep that's actually good and that people have been asking for a long time. This is something we've been grappling with for a while. As LGBT representation gets better, less fetishized, less vilified, and more overtly positive, a lot of older gays keep trying to force the outdated shit nobody likes anymore back into relevancy. Like how Rocky Horror Picture Show was a milestone in the 70s, but almost 50 years later, it's seen as a trans-misogynistic, rape-fetishizing piece of garbage to which certain older gays keep trying to force back into relevancy with bad rhetoric. And it's not like it just aged poorly, it was terrible from the start, and cis gays just didn't give a fuck because they weren't the targets of the most scorn. It's the same historical revisionism as Gone with the Wind. Rocky Horror was criticized when it came out, it's just that in 1975, cis gays and straight women pretending to be kinky cared even less about how trans women felt than they do now. Kinda like how cis gay millennials have such a meltdown over having to let go of Harry Potter because they care more about their Hogwarts house than trans people. And it's worth pointing out that cartoons have been doing good low-key gay rep for quite some time. It wasn't that Korra, Universe, and She-Ra had to lay the groundwork. Other shows were making strides in advancing the quality of gay rep while these three shows were clowning around sucking off anime and and shivving themselves in the ovaries. It's just that those shows were unfashionable. They weren't cool to talk about. You couldn't make up a new buzzword to pretend they weren't just half-baked Kingdom Hearts wannabes. They were part of a genre that was always here and will never die and was cringe to admit to enjoying and doesn't make for good headlines. We can blame executives until the cows come home, but the truth of the matter is that none of those other shows ever had this problem. And the two that are left both have creators who have constantly been on podcasts, interviews, and live streams admitting to the fact that their tastes in storytelling just aren't very good, and you can only ignore Occam's razor for so long. The answer to the question of why these two shows are so fundamentally different in how they approach gay romance is that one of them has a creator who is just better at it. I don't think Stevenson is a bad producer, by the way. It can often sound like I'm harsh on him when I keep using him as a talking point. While I wish I could, I don't have the breadth to cover why She-Ra completely fails at writing non-white characters, but I'm sure somebody else will point that out. But in truth, I think he's okay. His writing is okay. It's nothing to write home about, but it's adequate when he is not getting distracted by his own squee, and its biggest issues are issues that a lot of Kingdom Hearts wannabe shows have. I think he could make a perfectly good romance if his idea of romance wasn't completely ass backwards. And it's something we've seen him dip a toe into in that very show. Spinnerella and Natasa can be very cute when they're on screen. George and Lance, they're very cute when they're on screen. Adora and Glimmer are fucking adorable. And if the show had gone that route, it would have probably been the best romance ever written. It's not a matter of lack of skill. It's that he uses his skill to make something so nasty and cruel and callous at every turn, gleefully tormenting his main character until she breaks and accepts this horrible romance. I need to clarify this because I'm aware of the fact that it can sound like I think he's an awful storyteller all around with the way I use his work as a point of comparison. And recently, Stevenson himself has made a point about how we shouldn't be treating LGBT rep like a race. It's a community effort where every work is collectively building something together. The problem is that cyclical discourse makes it look like every instance of gay rep in a show is the first and only one of its kind. We cry revolutionary more than Disney cries first gay character. The uncomfortable truth is, we like our clickbait. We like our heroes. We like our parasocial relationships with executive producers, and we do this cycle over and over again because everyone wants their personal favorite to be considered the winner. It's part of why these few shows have fan bases that just can't let them go, because the narrative is that they invented gays all on their own from thin air, just like how a man called Romulus built Rome with his own two hands. It's mythologizing these three shows because it's more attractive to have stories of heroes rather than stories where nobody is a hero and everyone worked together, because that's a world where one individual show doesn't matter compared to the collective work of everyone. It's a world where bad LGBTA rep can exist, and we can throw it away, and the world doesn't end. And that is something that fandom, as rabidly anti-criticism as it is, finds to be profane. This idea of winners, of being the first past the post, of being the one that walked so others could run, it's a very capitalist mindset. And just like capitalism, the winner is remembered, and all the people they had to step on and wipe from history to get there are forgotten. I've spoken before about how 16 was actually faster to the punch than Korra, only to be told that it doesn't count because it didn't air in the US, which is such a horribly hypocritical attitude. What, do Sailor Moon and Cardcaptors no longer count because the FCC and the CRTC fucked them over? Does the Owl House not count because Taiwan got weird about Lumity? Sometimes LGBTA rep is bad, and that's not the end of the world. We've had a lot more wins than losses, and one show turning out to be kinda shit shouldn't be such an emotionally harrowing experience. We need to start having these discussions like adults. We need to talk about the fact that we romanticize violence and abuse. We need to be talking more about the differences in creative vision and the things creators prioritize and the very real perceptions of reality that they bring with them into their work, rather than immediately blaming executives for all perceived failings without actually thinking about it. The point is that discourse is my job, and I want it to suck less. We need to be more willing to just say, yeah, the ideas were flawed or actually kind of bad, without it being a big fucking emotional breakdown for some people. I know stan culture and people who love romanticized abuse will never go along with that, and are probably writing screeds about how I'm a sex-negative Puritan tranny squaw who is pretending to be trans to get in the pants of gay women down in the comments as we speak, but that doesn't mean we have to pretend like this is a healthy way to exist. Like, I can criticize the poorly paced story, one-note characters, inconsistent themes, conservative moral priorities, priorities, anime-obsessed irony poisoning, plagiarism, borderline simping for a fascist status quo, and racist tone policing and fetishization of Steven Universe until I'm blue in the face. And I did. Well, once my lungs recovered and I woke up from my coma, it didn't change the fact that Steven Universe was still moderately successful, got a movie and an epilogue series, and the creators are already talking about another season as we speak. So here is actual living proof that harsh criticism is not the end of the world and isn't going to ruin gay rep for everyone. So maybe we could all be a little less willing to play corporate defense force every time someone goes, hey, this is actually kind of fucked up. What difference does one little light make? We have others. Wait, did I just quote Zemnick?